The Strategos Institute of the Vel'thari Dominion clung to the twilight side of Qyx'theron like a crystalline tumor of academic ambition. For 3.5 centuries, this monument to overthinking had churned out tactical masters whose understanding of warfare was so refined, so mathematically precise, that actual combat had become almost an afterthought. The building itself seemed to hum with the accumulated weight of strategic wisdom, though whether that was profound enlightenment or just the ventilation system struggling with the ego density was a matter of some debate. Admiral Qyx'theron adjusted his ceremonial war cloak with movements that had been perfected through decades of mirror practice. Today marked the culmination of his educational journey, the moment when theoretical perfection would finally meet practical application. Around him, his graduating cohort of 12 master strategists radiated the confident calm of beings who had spent 3 centuries learning that every problem had an optimal solution, provided you had sufficient time to calculate it. The Academy's supreme tactician, Vel'thari the Methodical, stood before them with the bearing of someone who had never encountered a strategic scenario that couldn't be solved through proper application of the 7 sacred arts of war. His voice carried the measured cadence of absolute certainty as he delivered their final briefing. "Esteemed graduates," he began, each word precisely calibrated for maximum inspirational impact, "your first assignment represents the perfect synthesis of theory and practice. A minor trade dispute has emerged in the Outer Rim territories. Human merchants have established unauthorized commerce on Kepler 442b, disrupting established shipping lanes through their typical disregard for proper commercial protocols." The briefing chamber filled with a harmonious chittering that passed for polite amusement among the Vel'thari. Humans. Those chaotic primates who had somehow bumbled their way into space travel despite possessing all the strategic sophistication of caffeinated rodents. According to extensive Dominion intelligence files, human tactical doctrine consisted primarily of making things up as they went along and hoping for the best. It would be like deploying a master chess champion against someone who insisted on moving pieces randomly while shouting about feelings. Qyx'theron examined the tactical display with the satisfaction of someone about to demonstrate the superiority of proper education. Thornfield Station, a ramshackle trading post housing exactly 312 humans, defended by what their files generously described as a civilian security force consisting mainly of mechanics, traders, and various other individuals whose military experience appeared to be limited to recreational simulation activities. Their leader was listed as Jake Morrison, former corporate logistics coordinator turned station manager. The intelligence profile noted his complete lack of formal military training, though it did mention something called extensive experience in strategic gaming scenarios, which the Vel'thari analysts had dismissed as irrelevant recreational behavior. His educational background included a degree in supply chain management and what appeared to be an unhealthy obsession with something called tabletop warfare simulations. "Sir," ventured Sub-Admiral Qyx'theron, her 3 eyes gleaming with academic enthusiasm, "shouldn't we perhaps study their defensive capabilities more thoroughly? The 5th sacred art clearly emphasizes comprehensive reconnaissance before." "The 5th sacred art applies to opponents capable of meaningful resistance," Vel'thari interrupted with a dismissive gesture of someone who had written 17 treatises on tactical superiority. "These humans barely qualify as an organized commercial enterprise, much less a military threat. Consider this an applied demonstration in dominance projection theory." 4 standard days later, the Vel'thari battle fleet materialized in the Kepler 442 system, with all the ceremonial precision their culture had spent millennia perfecting. Ships arranged in the classical intimidation mandala, weapons powered to exactly 73.6% capacity for optimal psychological impact, communication arrays broadcasting the traditional pre-conflict negotiations that had governed civilized commercial disputes since the Second Galactic Concordat. Jake Morrison was attempting to repair a malfunctioning gravity generator when his communication console started producing what sounded like a formal alien language heavy on dramatic declarations and flowery metaphors. He set down his plasma wrench, grabbed a cup of coffee that had achieved room temperature sometime during the previous geological epoch, and wandered over to where the translation software was having what appeared to be a philosophical crisis. "Greetings, primitive human merchants of the Thornfield commercial facility," the translator finally managed, though it seemed personally offended by the formality. "I am Admiral Qyx'theron of the Vel'thari Strategic Fleet. By the ancient accords of civilized commercial warfare, I challenge your trading authority to honorable tactical resolution. You have 72 standard hours to prepare your defensive strategies and select your commercial champion. May the superior strategic intellect achieve victory through proper application of... Hold on there, buddy, Jake interrupted, scratching his head through hair that had given up any pretense of professional styling. Are you talking about some kind of strategic battle? Like a wargame scenario? Because that actually sounds pretty awesome. We run campaigns every Tuesday night if you want to drop by. Tommy makes excellent nachos. The communication channel went silent for approximately 93 seconds, during which Admiral Qyx'theron frantically consulted for different tactical references and experienced what could diplomatically be described as a minor crisis of professional confidence. This constitutes formal strategic combat, Qyx'theron finally responded, his voice carrying the strained patience of someone explaining hyperspace navigation to a particularly dense asteroid. Ancient protocols. Civilized commercial warfare. Your trading rights in this system hang in the balance. Oh, so it's like a really high-stakes campaign. Jake's enthusiasm was clearly audible across interstellar space. Even better. Hang on, let me round up the crew. Hey Lisa, cancel the inventory meeting. We've got aliens who want to run a strategic scenario. Within 2 hours, Thornfield Station's Defense Committee had assembled in what Jake optimistically called their command center, which bore a striking resemblance to the station's recreational lounge. The recreational lounge had been equipped with trade monitoring computers and a coffee machine that predated several galactic civilizations. The tactical display showed the Vel'thari fleet maintaining mathematically perfect formation, while broadcasting increasingly bewildered demands for proper military etiquette. All right, everyone, Jake announced to the 15 traders and mechanics who'd shown up, most still carrying whatever tools they'd been using when the announcement came through. Looks like we've got ourselves a genuine alien commercial dispute, except they want to settle it through formal strategic combat. Lisa, you handle our supply logistics, so you're basically playing support class. Rodriguez handles station maintenance, so you're our engineer. Thompson runs security systems, so you're our tactical specialist. Jake, interrupted Dr. Lisa Park, the station's chief medical officer, and the closest thing they had to a voice of administrative reason, are you treating this like one of your tabletop games? Well, obviously, what else would I do? Look, these aliens spent 3 centuries studying strategy like it's some kind of religious experience. That's adorable, but they clearly never faced a group that thinks creatively. Rodriguez, remember that time you saved the entire party by turning the dungeon's trap system against the boss? Same basic principle. Rodriguez grinned, still holding a molecular spanner he'd been using to recalibrate atmospheric recyclers. You want me to booby trap something? Not immediately. First, let's see what these guys are actually bringing to the table. Thompson, bring up our defense grid. Thornfield Station's defensive systems, such as they were, flickered to life on the main display. A collection of automated point defense turrets designed primarily for asteroid deflection, some mining charges Rodriguez had jury-rigged for perimeter security, and the sort of improvised barrier network that resulted from giving creative engineers too much free time and insufficient proper equipment. Admiral Qyx'theron, meanwhile, was experiencing something his tactical education had never adequately prepared him for, an opponent who refused to acknowledge the established rules of engagement. His carefully choreographed opening demonstration, a precisely calculated display of firepower designed to encourage rational surrender, had been met with what his translator assured him was genuine appreciation for the light show and a request for more visual effects in the next sequence. Sir, Sub-Admiral NYXVEL reported with the bewildered tone of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality was actively dissolving. They are asking if we're using standard encounter rules and whether we want to establish turn order for the engagement. What could that possibly mean? Qyx'theron demanded. Intelligence suggests it might relate to their primitive recreational activities, but sir, they're not responding like any opponent in our strategic databases. The first actual exchange of hostilities occurred when the Vel'thari launched what the doctrine classified as a measured probe, a mathematically optimized strike designed to test enemy capabilities while demonstrating the futility of continued resistance. The energy barrage illuminated Thornfield's defensive perimeter in a display that should have sent any rational commercial entity scrambling for negotiation terms. Instead, Jake's voice crackled over the communication channel with what sounded distinctly like genuine excitement. "Oh wow, that was beautiful. Classic orbital superiority opener. Okay team, they're going with the traditional overwhelming firepower approach. Lisa, rear out power from non-essential systems to the deflector grid. Rodriguez, remember the siege of Castle Grimhold? Time for some creative problem solving." "You want me to dig under them?" Rodriguez asked, because apparently station defense meetings and gaming sessions had evolved into a unified strategic philosophy. Even better, they are maintaining perfect mathematical formation because their doctrine probably has 17 chapters about optimal positioning and strategic coherence. Which means they are completely predictable. Thompson, can you make our defense turrets look like they are malfunctioning? Malfunctioning how? Like we're panicking and don't know what we're doing. Make it chaotic. Make it random. Make it look like we're about to offer unconditional surrender. Admiral Qyx'theron observed the human defensive systems deteriorate with the satisfaction of someone whose expensive education was finally producing measurable results. The enemy fire patterns displayed all the characteristics of poorly trained civilians: erratic targeting, inefficient energy expenditure, defensive positions that seemed to shift without any discernible tactical logic. Sir, NYXVEL reported, they are conforming exactly to Behavioral Model 12, Commercial Civilian Collapse. Shall we proceed with the inevitable supremacy configuration? Naturally. Signal the fleet to advance according to the classical subjugation protocol. This engagement should conclude within the standard time frame. That was precisely when Jake unleashed what he casually described as the old misdirection gambit with a side of environmental exploitation, though the Vel'thari tactical computers would later classify it as mathematically impossible strategic chaos theory. The mining charges Rodriguez had been positioning weren't intended to damage the alien vessels directly. They were carefully placed to destabilize the asteroid field the Vel'thari had dismissed as irrelevant background debris. When the fleet advanced into their textbook formation, they discovered themselves navigating what Jake cheerfully termed dynamic terrain hazards, as chunks of rock and frozen volatiles began careening through their mathematically perfect strategic positioning. "What is occurring?" Qyx'theron demanded as his beautiful formation scattered like startled prey animals. "They've militarized the local environment, sir. This scenario isn't covered in any of our strategic references. It's basic area control theory," Jake explained over the open channel, his tone suggesting he was discussing something as routine as inventory management. "You guys really need to think more three-dimensionally. Lisa, now would be optimal." Thornfield's actual defensive capabilities activated then, not the decoy turrets they'd been firing previously, but a network of industrial cutting lasers, mining equipment, and cargo handling systems that had been quietly repurposed while the Vel'thari focused on what they assumed was the primary engagement. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't traditional, and it certainly wasn't covered in any strategic manual composed during the last 3 centuries. It was also remarkably effective. "This is impossible," Qyx'theron protested as his fleet found itself caught between improvised weapons fire and a debris field that seemed to anticipate their tactical responses. They possessed no formal training, no strategic methodology, no centuries of accumulated tactical wisdom. "Sir," NYXVEL's voice had acquired the hollow quality of someone watching their entire worldview become obsolete in real time. "I don't believe they are following any established doctrine whatsoever." "Of course we're not," Jake replied, apparently having intercepted the transmission. "Doctrine is what you use when you can't think of anything interesting. Look, you folks seem decent enough, but you're fighting like you're still in military academy. Too rigid, too predictable. You need to develop some proper creative thinking skills." The engagement, if it could legitimately be called that, concluded when Rodriguez managed to disable the Vel'thari flagship's primary propulsion systems, using what he described as basically the same technique I used against the mechanical dragon, except with actual explosives instead of imaginary ones. The magnificent vessel that had been constructed according to principles of optimal strategic engineering found itself drifting helplessly, while its crew frantically attempted to comprehend how their perfect tactical formation had been dismantled by what appeared to be organized chaos. "All right, that was entertaining," Jake announced as the remaining Vel'thari ships either withdrew or transmitted surrender codes. "You guys want to stick around for the post-game analysis? I can brew fresh coffee," and Lisa brought homemade cookies. Admiral Qyx'theron found himself in the surreal situation of sitting in a commercial break room, holding a ceramic mug decorated with something called Galaxy's Most Adequate Manager, while a human who treated interstellar conflict like a recreational hobby explained where his centuries of tactical education had gone comprehensively wrong. "See, your fundamental problem is assuming there's always an optimal solution," Jake continued, gesturing with a chocolate chip cookie that had achieved legendary status among the station crew. "Strategy isn't pure mathematics. It's creative problem-solving under pressure. You spent 3 centuries learning the most effective ways to fight other people who spent 3 centuries learning identical strategies. But what happens when you encounter someone who improvises everything?" "That's..." Qyx'theron began, then paused. His tactical training literally contained no framework for processing this conversation. "That's how you get your entire fleet disabled by repurposed mining equipment and cargo handling systems," Rodriguez added helpfully. "Also, your formation patterns are mathematically beautiful, but they have about as much flexibility as crystallized carbon." "We have contingency protocols," NYXVEL protested weakly. "Thousands of tactical variations for every conceivable engagement scenario." "Right, but what about inconceivable scenarios?" Lisa asked. "What about situations your training never addressed because they violated established principles of civilized warfare?" "That would be..." Qyx'theron struggled with a concept his education had never prepared him to encounter. "That would be theoretically impossible." "Exactly." Jake beamed. "Theory is fantastic for engineering and logistics, but conflict resolution is about psychology, creativity, and adaptation. You can't solve human problems with Vel'thari solutions." "So what would you recommend?" Qyx'theron asked, with the tone of someone whose entire professional identity was being systematically deconstructed and rebuilt. Jake grinned with the expression of someone who had just discovered a new player for his regular gaming group. "Well, if you're not in any hurry to report back to your strategic institute, we've got a new campaign starting Tuesday night. You guys might actually excel at it once you learn to think outside the tactical manual." And that was how the Strategos Institute acquired its first human consultant, though the official records would describe it as a cross-cultural exchange program in adaptive strategic methodologies. Jake never did finish repairing that gravity generator, but he did teach an entire generation of alien strategists that sometimes the most effective strategy is acknowledging you don't need one. The Vel'thari, for their part, eventually revised their curriculum to include what they formerly classified as dynamic chaos theory applications, though everyone simply called it the human approach. Their graduation ceremonies became considerably less formal and significantly more practical, though they never quite understood why Jake insisted on providing snacks during every strategic planning session. As for Thornfield Station, they briefly considered establishing a formal military academy, but ultimately decided they had more important things to accomplish than spending centuries learning to overcomplicate straightforward problems. Besides, Tuesday night gaming was sacred, and you couldn't properly run a campaign if you were busy teaching aliens how to think creatively. The galaxy, as circumstances revealed, became a considerably more interesting place when strategy evolved from following ancient wisdom into figuring out what to do when ancient wisdom encountered someone who had never bothered to study it in the first place.